But the sacrament is giving you the grace to move in the direction of perfection, and that is how we are headed in the sacrament. And holiness, very important. This was not so much focused on a very long time ago in the church, if we go back to the Middle Ages or so. But now we very much focus on this on all the sacraments. We always did on most of the sacraments, but particularly in marriage, that it is a call to holiness. The sacrament should bring both of you to be more holy. And so that's part of the reason of the sacrament. And again, the church says, from a valid marriage arises a bond between the spouses, which by its very nature is perpetual and exclusive. Furthermore, in a Christian marriage, the spouses are strengthened, as it were, consecrated for the duties and the dignity of their state by a special sacrament. Okay, sacramental marriage is a sacred calling. Sacred means holy or set aside for a specific purpose. So when you become married, you are set aside for a purpose. Actually, several of them. You're set aside to help to make your spouse holy. Not that you make your spouse holy, but you assist them on the road to holiness, to be their helpmate, as it said. And that's both men and women. Of course, you're called to be open to bring new life into the world as children. And you're called to be a sign of God's love for His church. Calling, of course, is a destiny to a particular way of following God's will. And so that's what marriage is. It's a vocation. Just as someone is called to the priesthood, that's their way of holiness and the way of bringing, hopefully, brothers and sisters along with them, just like we say in Cursillo. Marriage is a way that you bring others to Christ. When they see your marriage, they should want to run off to the church. Well, they should want to run off and be like you. They want what you want. Let's put it that way. They should see the love between you and be very much attracted. And of course, that calling brings us to a responsibility and a purpose that is in fact greater than us. Okay, sacramental marriage is also a very important defense against the snares of the devil, to help us on that road to holiness. So, and we do that because, and the two shall become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one flesh. It is that idea that as we come together and be one, that bond is much more powerful in our lives than what we had as single persons. And that's nothing against the single state of life. If you're called to be single, then God gives you the grace to live that life. But if you're called to be married, you need that grace of your marriage, your coupleness, as we sometimes call it in marriage prep, to resist the snares of the devil, in fact, to evangelize the world. So, the two truly do become one by the grace of God. Man and woman were made for each other. Not that God left them half-made and incomplete. He created them to be in communion of persons, in which each can be the helpmate of the other. For they are equal persons, bones of my bones, and complementary as masculine and feminine. In marriage, God unites them in such a way that by forming one flesh, they can transmit human life, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth by transmitting human life to their descendants. Man and women as spouses and parents cooperate in a unique way in the Creator's work. So, just a note. How much time do I have? My timer just sort of stopped. I'm already over probably, huh? No? Okay. This is, these are not words from the Catechism. Most of the other long paragraphs that I put on there, and I know Deacon Noe's telling me, you're not supposed to do that in presentations. I know it, but sometimes I can't help myself because I won't be able to read it from somewhere else. So, anyway, these are my words, but it's a way of kind of summarizing what the Church teaches about this unifying aspect and the procreative aspect, particularly in the context of our sexual relationship. And it's important that I say this because of what I'm going to talk to you about in a moment, about our being protected against the snares of the devil, which this is part of the way that God uses the church to protect against the snares of the devil. Marriage protects the gifts of human sexuality. The unifying and procreative purposes of sexual intimacy cannot be separated from each other and can only be effectively linked through a valid marriage. The unifying purpose is achieved by the man and the woman freely giving themselves to each other for each other's benefit. The procreative purpose is achieved through the co-creation with God of human life, and then nourishing and raising this new life in the faith that brought husband and wife together. Married couples must be open to children in each instance of sexual intimacy. And so I bring this up as being kind of a summary of what the church teaches, and we'll talk just briefly about it in a little bit more detail as we go on. Just wanted to mention something because I kind of was picking on St. Augustine earlier. One of the reasons is because of that part there that says the man and the women freely giving themselves to each other for each other's benefit. Church teaching for a while was very much to diminish the notion of pleasure. And in fact, some theologians actually taught that the pleasure in sexual intercourse was unholy or sinful. So you had to try and have sex without pleasure. They didn't quite go that far, but practically speaking, if you read the theology, they're almost saying that. And some suggested that even though the act was good, that the pleasure was still a venial sin, even. Some people suggested that. So that's why I say we're in a very blessed world because our theology has moved a little ways in the right direction. Not that we changed any of the fundamentals of what we believe, but our understanding of the integration of the human body. And much of that, what St. Augustine said, came about by a very negative influence in the church, which I'll mention just briefly on another slide. So marriage has been under attack by Satan ever since the Garden of Eden. You probably might remember this verse from the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. They will strike at your head, while you strike at their heel. And of course this is a reference to our Blessed Mother, the church teaches, but it's also this idea of Satan attacking the very institution of marriage, which of course he did when he tempted Eve and then caused Eve to tempt Adam, and from there it was a very much of a change in our world. So, the tools the devil uses against marriage, Gnosticism is the one I mentioned that sort of influenced St. Augustine. It was this idea that the body, the physical, was evil. And I'm not saying that Augustine was a Gnostic. Gnosticism was a condemned heresy in the church many, many years ago. But there's a great deal of influence in that, both within the church and without the church. And interestingly enough, in the secular world today, Gnosticism is still alive, and it is sort of a reformed version of Gnosticism, but it kind of teaches the same thing. It says that the physical is not integrated with the spiritual, therefore I can do anything I darn well like with my body. That's the new Gnosticism. So it's been throughout the church, for the history of the church, and even probably before the church. Divorce. Divorce is also, of course, a great enemy of marriage. And I don't want to talk in detail. There are different viewpoints on that. I mean, we certainly, divorce, by the way, I should say what it is. It ends the legal contract of marriage. That's all it does. It doesn't end your marriage as far as the church is concerned. It ends the legal marriage. Poverty. The reason I say poverty is one of the things that influenced some rather poor marriage practices over the years, including the polygamy, in a sense, for certain women who would attach themselves to the king because it was a way to survive and a way to thrive. And so poverty has had negative effects on marriage throughout history. So that's why I mentioned that. And even today, in some sense, it is the idea that people feel trapped. Perhaps they're very poor and they don't stay in the marriage because they want to go off and be on their own because they feel it will be better for them economically. Contraception. Contraception weakens marriage and promotes abortion. One of the primary reason contraception is wrong is it tries to separate the unitive capacity, the unitive purpose of sexual intimacy from the procreative. So contraception is intrinsically evil, actually, the church says. And it does promote abortion. If you really look at it, abortion has been tremendously affected by contraception and not the way that Planned Parenthood would tell you. In vitro fertilization, again, it separates the procreative from the unifying. It also destroys embryos, but the primary reason it's wrong, I mean, that's very, very wrong, right, is that it separates those two conditions. So it is condemned by the church and also considered, by the way, intrinsically evil. It's not evil because of the circumstances, but it's inherently evil. Redefinition of marriage. And, you know, people sometimes say, well, you know, what's so important about that? You know, that, you know, gay people, so what? But it is really an attack on the fundamental notion of marriage, and so the church, of course, has come out very strong against that. And then academia. The academic environment is very much against what the church teaches about marriage. And it's probably worse off in many cases in Catholic schools in this country. Not all of them, please, not all of them. But I mean, I was shocked at what was said at the graduation of my daughter from UCSB this last June. I'm not going to go into the details exactly, but basically the idea of the promotion of gay marriage at a graduation ceremony. And I mean, if you send your child to the university system in California, they will be indoctrinated in many things. And hopefully they'll be taught along the way something, and I think they will. I think they're probably taught a lot. But they will be indoctrinated in a number of things that go very much against the church. And I say indoctrinated because they typically aren't going to get logical arguments, and there won't be discussions about these things. It will be understood that you are to believe these things. So anyway, that's one of the, I would say, Satan's strongest allies in this age against marriage. But we do have this wonderful grace of the sacrament, and I kind of hated to end with that slide, but I knew if I went much longer, I'd be way over the 20 minutes. The previous slide, I should say. But, you know, we do have a wonderful gift of the sacrament of marriage in the church. And believe me, we will win because God says so. And so, even though there are a lot of forces against marriage, marriage is such a beautiful experience, and God's grace is so amazing. I think so many of you can testify to that are in wonderful marriages. And this good news needs to be taught. And another part of the good news, though, is, you know, I look at the young people that are around us today, and they will get this. They will understand this. If you go to, for instance, the March for Life, which I know isn't directly about marriage, but it really is, it's getting younger every single year. I mean, I feel like such an old person on that walk, I'll tell you. You look around, and you know, everybody's 20, 30, 40, 50 years younger than me. Well, some are, actually, but yeah. Okay, anyway, that was it. If we have some questions, I know we're pretty much out of time. I forgot what I told you to remind me to say. What was it about?
Yeah, you said something about to remind you of something.
I know, but now I forgot what it was. Did anybody remember what
30
I was
minutes.
talking about?
30 minutes. 30 minutes.
30 minutes?
See? So,
Okay.
any questions?
Well, you know what? When I asked about what is it about the validity of marriage, you said it should be each valid if both of them are baptized. Both of them are baptized.
Let me stop you right there. You're asking, it sounds like two questions in one. Validity of marriage is one thing. Sacramental marriage is something else. They're two related, but not exactly the same thing.
Okay.
So,
Sacramental marriage if both of them are baptized. But then you said also about the contract. It should be valid. It should be a valid contract for both of them. The marriage, sacramental marriage must also be a valid contract.
a valid marriage.
A valid marriage. So that is confusing me. Because my question earlier is that, how about if the other one is of different belief? there must be a permission, and then they will still be married, right?
They will be married, but it won't be sacramental. The marriage,
Sacramental.
see, let me just say what the church would tell you in a pastoral way. Let's say your daughter is getting married and she's going to marry a Muslim, okay?
So then it's not valid marriage then?
No, it is valid. They're separate things.
But they're not sacramental.
Now, if you come and say, you know,
I would not accept it as valid if...
well, wait a minute,
What am I thinking?
you know what you, I think is not important, and it sounds a little bit harsh, but as Catholics, we submit to the teaching of the Church, and the teaching of the Church is who, because she's been given the authority by Christ, she is the one who determines what is valid. I think I remember what I was going to say, but I'll do it after we finish this. So the Church says that marriage is valid if it has proper form and matter. It is valid. Now, the form and matter means that it's witnessed by the clergy, the consent is witnessed, and the consent is valid. So you're really making a covenant relationship. And in this diocese, and most of the dioceses in the United States, that has to be in the Catholic Church. Sometimes there are exceptions where it could be done somewhere else. But that is the rule of the Church, and so that makes the marriage valid. But it will only be sacramental if both the people are baptized Christians. And that makes sense if you think about the theology, is that baptism is the gateway to the sacraments. So you can't have any other sacrament unless you've been baptized. So that's really the way to think about that. Sister Cora.
Maybe you can explain the difference more clearly if you tell us what happens if our marriage is not sacramental, in plain words. I mean,
Not sacramental or not valid?
sacramental, not sacramental. Because the confusion is they equate sacramental to validity.
Yeah.
What you're saying, right?
Right, okay.
We have a valid, but not
Yeah,
sacramental.
okay, let me explain that then. That would be better.
Yeah.
Okay, if you are in a valid marriage, okay, compared to a sacramental marriage, well, the first thing that's different is that you're not receiving the grace of the sacrament, that special grace of that special sacrament. The other thing that is important, though, for the baptized person, the baptized Catholic, is that person is still in a valid marriage. He's still done everything according to the Church. He's still eligible to receive Holy Communion. Okay. If the marriage was both not sacramental and not valid, the person is in violation of church law and is not supposed to receive communion. So the advantage, if you will, of having the marriage be valid and not sacramental, in other words, it can't be sacramental because, you can't force the person to be baptized, right? So if you're going to marry somebody who's not baptized, you want to be married in the church if you're a faithful Catholic, because that's what the Church tells you to do, and you can still celebrate the other sacraments. If you don't, then you're not supposed to celebrate the sacraments. So that's the difference between those two. But ideally, you want the marriage to be sacramental because you want the grace. Now, having said all that, these are the laws of the Church, and they are given to us by the authority of Christ, so we need to obey them. But also realize that Christ and God are, in a sense, even with the law of the Church, in a sense. So I believe, anyway, that if two people are in a marriage, and particularly a valid marriage, and even though they don't have the grace of the sacrament, God wants them to succeed in that marriage. He's somehow going to deliver that grace to them via some vehicle that they will survive in that marriage if they are, in fact, open to God's grace. Okay? Now, in many, many cases, the way we find he does that is later on they have a conversion and they come to the church. I don't know what percentage of the people in RCIA are in those kind of marriage situations, but I'm pretty sure it's a fairly large portion. So oftentimes that faith comes later on. Now, that's not meant to be an encouragement for you to encourage your children or yourselves, if you're still eligible to be married, to go out and marry someone who's not a Catholic. I strongly recommend trying to marry a Catholic. But keep in mind that God's grace will be there to anyone who is open to it. Yes, brother, and then I think this has to be the last question.
Yeah, last one.
I'm really in trouble.
Last question. Do you consider the Mormon Christian religion?
No, the Mormon baptism is not considered Christian baptism. It's a good point because there are some areas that may be questionable, so you might have to ask. But the Mormon religion itself is not